Hi folks, this video is to introduce and discuss the version 1.1 update to Hero. We'll be covering the new template view feature, the changes to the results including the new regulatory compliance suggestions, heating, cooling load limits, area summaries and export facilities, and some of the new zone types that have been added. We'll then also cover some of the minor changes from version 1 to version 1.1. The first thing you might notice for version 1.1 is the new template view, which allows you to set up your defaults for your project prior to creating any objects. So you can set up various defaults across the categories you see here at the top: walls, floors, ceilings, openings, etc. So taking walls as an example, here you can set up the default wall height. Its current is 2400, but if you had, say, a 2700mm wall in your project, you can enter that here. You can then change the assembly type of your external walls, internal walls, as well as their initial insulation types and external colors. And likewise, you can do similar changes on the floor or ceiling tabs and other sections of the template view. So as an example, if this project was not the Hero default floor of 100mm concrete slab on ground, we could change that to, say, a suspended AAC floor like Hebel power floor with an additional R2 insulation perhaps. The majority of zones in this project are tile, so we can enter that. And the subfloor ventilation, given this is a suspended construction, and creating a subfloor zone below, we could set that too. And then if we had multiple levels in the project, we could set up an internal floor construction. So if we had a 2-level project where the upper floor was an AAC floor too, you could set that as your top floor construction, and even internal floor insulation. If there was, say, 1.5 acoustic insulation between those floors, we could set that. Likewise, I could do the same in the ceiling section where you can change the default external ceiling or roof construction. So let's say this project was a concrete tile attic roof. We could change that. We're going to start the project at R3 ceiling insulation and a non-reflective sarking, perhaps both upwards and downward facing non-reflective air gaps for the roof insulation specified here in the roof, facing into the roof space. And we could change the external color too. So let's say we have a light roof color. For windows, we could set up the defaults here. Note the available options are based on the selected window list, which you choose within Hero's window library. So if you have a custom window which is not available for selection, you would need to go within the window library and change that, select that, and do the template again, or just change the specification later in the opening data grid. You can set the default heights of these windows, default style, frame color, external shade options too, as you'd like. Doors are entered relatively similarly. You have the external doors and internal doors, and any permanent openings will use the permanent opening default height here. So if you had, say, insulated external doors, you could change the specification here. Let's say they were 2340 high rather than the internal doors remaining 2040. You could do that here too. Skylights are similar. You enter your defaults of specification, reflectivity, shaft length, etc. If you don't have any skylights or roof windows, then don't worry about this section and move on. In the levels section, you'll see the default level height for the project for the first level. Note if you have a basement, that's obviously going to be negative height here. And then you can set up your default level to level, floor to floor heights. And the shade objects, which include screens and eaves, are shown here, so you can set up their default heights. And then there are 2 checkboxes which allow you to turn on or off the automatic wing wall detection capabilities of Hero, i.e. detecting wing walls based on adjacent walls of other zones, or detecting wing walls based on screens. So if you'd like to enter those manually and not have these automatic wing walls created for those situations, you can turn those off. And you can also turn those back on anytime in the settings and they'll reassess. The last tab of the template view is zone items. Here you can firstly choose your ceiling fan size. The next option is to turn on or off Hero's automatic zone item creation or penetration creation. We've improved that feature slightly for version 1.1, where it now recognizes not adding zone items to zones like garages or car parks, and there's been a few tweaks that recognize when you do user changes on these penetrations, so it doesn't try to re-add them automatically if you've manually touched them. And so you can set your default values for exhaust and downlights here within your project too. So once you've entered in this data, you hit OK, and now you're ready to create your model geometry. So as an example, let's just create a simple zone, put some windows and doors in, And then let's look at the data grid. You'll see the level height has been set at our originally specified value of 0.5 for this project. Our wall construction is that specified 2700 high wall with the construction and insulation and colour we originally specified in the template, and likewise our internal walls too. Our floors and ceilings are likewise all of those matching the template specifications, and windows likewise changed. And if we have to, we might now vary these windows, say opening styles, to their specific types. Note, there's no need to use the template view. You can just hit OK or cancel and start your project and enter your geometry and change these values later in the data grid. It will just use Hero's default values for all of the items created initially. We'll be expanding on this template view in future releases. We're planning on integrating the ability to save and load your own custom templates, so you don't need to go through this process each time. You could set up then typical templates for things like apartment projects or specific client templates. We'll also be adding new items into these template categories in future to deal with other default values that aren't currently shown, such as second-story wall constructions for two-level homes. We'll be adding typical neighbouring or party wall constructions, etc. in future. So this template view is a nice improvement to the workflow of creating a project within Hero. It makes sense to decide and enter these things first rather than using the Hero default values and then creating a project in the visual view and moving to the data grid. Obviously, you'll still need to edit objects later that do vary from this template default. So windows are still generally going to need their own specific geometry and dimensions entered, and there may be various wall constructions used in your project. So the template view is just to hopefully get the majority of items correct initially, and you'll still be moving to the data grid to customize specific items later. Another of the main new features within Hero version 1.1 is a range of changes to the way we present results and compliance requirements, such as star ratings, heating and cooling loads, and heating and cooling load limits. One of the first things you'll notice in version 1.1 in terms of results is that the results summary shown in the status bar or bottom right of the model view now shows heating and cooling loads for your project, not just star rating. So for a single dwelling project, you'll still see the star rating, and then the heating load per square metre, which is shown with a sun icon, and the cooling load, which is shown with a snowflake icon. So like air conditioner remote controls, just remember the sun warms the room, the snowflake cools the room. For multi-dwelling projects, this varies slightly, so you'll see for a multi-dwelling project, the results summary will show the minimum star rating of any dwelling within that project, as well as the average star rating of all dwellings within that project. Conversely, the average heating and cooling loads, as well as the maximum heating and cooling loads, are shown for the project. This is to cater to regulatory requirements for multi-dwelling projects that are typically assessed on minimum and average star ratings, as well as average and maximum heating and cooling load limits. The second thing you'll notice is if you hover over this results summary in version 1.1, you'll now see a quick snapshot of your compliance requirements as suggested by Hero. So again, this snapshot of what we call limits is split into single and multi-dwelling project variations. And we also vary our suggestions depending on whether you're in New South Wales with BASIX requirements or the other states where the NatHERS star rating and ABCB heating cooling load limits potentially apply. So the references for these limits is taken from the ABCB heating cooling load limits document and the BASIX thermal comfort protocol. So for a typical single dwelling project in a non-New South Wales location, this summary will show a suggestion of the required star rating for the project, as well as a suggested heating and cooling load limit for the project. And so for each of these limits, Hero shows you where we are taking our suggestion from at the top here, so you can understand where we derive this calculated suggestion from. So to start with, for the star rating requirement for a single dwelling project, this is typically 6 stars based on the current NCC 2019. However, for NCC Climate Zones 1 and 2, there are concessions available to reduce that to 5 or 5.5 stars based on having an insulated outdoor living area and or ceiling fan, and I'll explain how those are entered and assessed slightly later. For the heating and cooling load limits, again for non-New South Wales projects, these are shown based on Hero's assessment of the floor type of the lowest condition zone in your project, as per ABCB's heating and cool load limit document's definition There are two situations for these limits. One where you have a concrete slab on ground throughout the whole lowest habitable level of your dwelling, and then limits for a suspended floor or a mixture of suspended and slab on ground floors on that lowest habitable level. So Hero will automatically pick that up and show you the relevant limits. So if you have all concrete slab on ground, or waffle pod constructions in Hero will show you that ABCB table's limits. But if you have any suspended floors or all suspended floors in your condition zones in your lowest level, then we'll show you the suspended floor limits. For Class 1 projects that are in NCC climate zones 1 or 2, where you do have the potential to have a 5 or 5.5 star requirement due to these outdoor living areas or fans, if you have entered those details, and I'll show you how to do that later, then again, the limits will be based on those sections of the ABCB heating cooling load limit tables for 5 or 5.5 star Class 1 requirements. Obviously there are climate zones where there are no heating cooling load limits required, and in this situation we just note that too. For multi-dwelling Class 2 apartment projects within non-New South Wales locations, we show again the required star ratings, which in the current NCC, except for regional variations, which we'll hopefully deal with in future releases, are typically a 6-star average rating across the dwellings with a minimum of 5 stars for any single dwelling, and so we'll show that there. And again, the heating and cooling load limits are shown for these projects. For Class 2 projects, there's no accounting for floor types required, it's just the average heating and cooling load limit that must be met for the project, and then there is a maximum that any dwelling individually can have on its individual heating and cooling loads. For multi-dwelling Class 1 projects like townhouses, etc., where we can, we show you the limits. In most cases, if they're all the same, this is a single star rating requirement and single heating and cooling load limit, if they share those. There are cases though where you have varying star rating or heating and cooling load limits for individual dwellings. In this case, we just note varies, and you'll have to look at the results view to see the specific requirements, and I'll talk about that later. So this situation might occur for, say, a townhouse with a slab-on-grade construction and an adjacent townhouse with suspended construction where they have different heating and cooling load limits. We'll just show varies. Or another example is a townhouse in NCC Climate Zone 1 with an outdoor ceiling fan and a 5.5 star requirement versus an adjacent townhouse without those outdoor areas or fans with a 6-star requirement, which will have different heating and cooling load limits. Again, you'll just see varies, and you'll have to look at the specific requirements within the results view. Now I'll discuss the New South Wales specific case, where we have BASIC's regulatory requirements for thermal comfort. So in version 1.1, we have completely integrated the BASIC's heating cooling load caps as per the BASIC's thermal comfort protocol. These are calculated slightly differently than the ABCB limits for various floor types, areas, and project types. So the first thing you'll notice when you hover over the summary to show the limits pop up is that there's no star rating requirements shown, just the heating cooling load limit suggestions. So while the BASIC's caps are based on a similar floor type differentiation of slab on ground and suspended constructions, the BASIC's heating and cooling load caps are based on proportional areas of these constructions throughout your project. So if you have a project that is 100% slab on ground, we'll show you the concrete slab on ground limits. If you have a project that's 100% suspended, or alternatively if you have a mud brick wall, which is another condition there, then we'll show you the suspended floor BASIC limits. And if you had, say, a 50-50 split of areas of slab on ground versus suspended floor types, then we proportionally calculate those limits as per the BASIC's thermal comfort protocol. For multi-dwelling projects, both Class 1 and Class 2 projects require average and maximum values, so we'll show you the average heating and cooling load limit requirements and the maximum for any individual dwelling. Now be aware, these star rating and heating and cooling load limit requirements are suggestions made by Hero. You must still ensure you are carrying out your own investigations and are certain of the regulatory requirements in your local area, given there are so many variations. But Hero's suggestions are there to hopefully save you time and allow you to quickly assess how you're going on your project. There are a wide range of regulatory compliance requirements throughout Australia, and we'd love to do the work once so you don't have to do it each time. So we are planning to integrate additional compliance requirements where we can, such as, for example, Queensland's MP 4.1 policy, which does vary these conditions, which I also note has been updated recently to come into effect next year, 2021, with some additional heating cooling load limits. So we'll be bringing those in too in the future. In the next release, we're also hoping to give you some quick visual information on whether you are complying with these suggested limits. So you'll see some visual indicators in the summary results, such as red for non-compliance in version 1.2 coming soon. I mentioned the star rating requirements for NCC climate zones 1 and 2, where you have the potential for 5 or 5.5 star compliance with outdoor ceiling fans and outdoor living areas. So Hero now detects whether you are in any of these zones based on your entered postcode. And note, these aren't the 69 NatHERS climate zones, they are the 8 NCC climate zones. So if we detect you are in an NCC climate zone 1 or 2, within the project data grid view, you will now see a new section become visible called Regulatory, with 2 new options for your project that allow you to notify Hero that you are aiming for star rating compliance using one of these various options. So if you check the box outdoor living area and/or outdoor ceiling fan, your required star rating will drop and will update any heating, cooling, load limit requirements. Note, it is not as simple as just having those. There is a definition of what these areas and fans are within the NCC. We've summarised that in the tooltip that's shown if you hover over this space. For a multi-dwelling Class 1 project, you may actually have a townhouse with an outdoor area that meets that definition and one without. And so we can't assess this at a project level for multiple Class 1 projects, but at the dwelling level. So when you create your second dwelling in an NCC Climate Zone 1 or 2 area, that regulatory section disappears from the Project Data Grid tab and moves to the Dwelling Data Grid tab, similar to Site Exposure Attributes. And here you select per dwelling your specific outdoor living area or ceiling fan requirements. Note, these 2 checkbox columns are only shown for these NCC Climate Zones 1 and 2 and for Class 1 projects only, not Class 2. So as an example for this very simple box project here, if I run the simulation without any of these checkboxes ticked, Hero will suggest you are likely targeting a 6-star compliance and show you those limits. However, if you tick both of those boxes and run the simulation, you'll now be shown it's perhaps a 5-star project with 5-star related heating and cooling load limits shown as suggestions. So I'll move now to the results view, where these requirements of star ratings and heating cooling load limits are replicated in further detail. So when you have a single dwelling project, within the results view, you'll not only see your star rating and heating cooling loads, but now you'll see again, if there are any, the star rating requirements, not shown for any project in New South Wales, and the heating cooling load limits, where they're applicable. Again, there is a reference to where these limits are coming from within the view, so you know where the Hero calculations derive from. And again, if it is a New South Wales project, we'll show you the BASIC's heating cooling load limit caps in this space similarly. For a multi-dwelling project, firstly, within the dwelling viewer results, where we're currently looking at individual dwelling requirements, you'll still see similar to the single dwelling results, so you can look at specific individual dwellings and their requirements there, and you can toggle through those in the combo box at the top here. But it'll generally be more useful to see these within the summary view of the results view, for you to see all dwelling results summarised and presented. So here again, the average and minimum star ratings are shown, and if you have a star rating requirement, they'll be shown here too. You'll also then see the average and maximum heating and cooling loads, as well as the average and maximum heating and cool load limits if they apply. Again, if they are not all the same for a multi-dwelling project, it may show varies, and you'll have to look at those dwellings on a case-by-case basis. You could do that within the dwelling view individually that I just showed you, or more easily, we have updated the dwelling results table within the summary section of the results view, so that it now shows you the star rating of each dwelling, the heating and cooling loads of each dwelling, as well as the limits for each of these dwellings. And so you can check individual compliance there, and then if you have an average compliance requirement, you could check that in the summary section here. While we are here in the results view, I will discuss 2 other changes we've made to the results view in version 1.1. The first is we've added an area summary to the dwelling section of the results view. It's initially not shown in much detail until you hit the More button. This summary is primarily for BASICS users who do need to enter specific floor areas related to conditioned, unconditioned and garage areas, as well as areas of suspended floors of various subfloor ventilation types, areas of concrete floors and areas above garages, and so you'll find those here. The final change we've made to the results view in version 1.1 is that we have added a range of changes to the export facilities of our results. And so within each section of the results view, we now have the drop-down menu where you can select not only the previous available option of just taking a picture snapshot of that area, so you can still do that to keep it in the visual format of Hero for your reports, but we now have two new options, copy to clipboard and export to CSV. Copy to clipboard copies the data ready for pasting from the Windows clipboard, and the export to CSV is very similar, creating a CSV file that takes that data into a CSV format. So when you hit copy to clipboard, you can then go into your reports, say Excel, paste that data directly. You'll get most of the data from that view, including star ratings, heating and cooling loads, star rating limits, heating and cooling load limits, and areas that I just mentioned in that export. Note, if it's a multi-dwelling project, this copy to clipboard will actually pick up all dwellings, so even though you're in single dwelling results view, it does make that export feature much more usable. And likewise, you can do that on the zone by zone results table, where you can now export that to clipboard or CSV and drop that in, and you'll see similar data to those tables. Pie charts, however, remain only in export to image format currently. And likewise, within multi-dwelling projects, you can utilize the same new export facilities for the summary section of the results view for both the results section and the dwelling by dwelling table, and you can copy and paste those results very quickly too. In version 1.1, we've introduced two new zone types and amended one existing zone type to assist you to model more effectively. So we now have two new zone types. They also then create some new adjacency conditions that are shown in the various adjacency columns of the data grid to deal better with some situations occurring in practice. So the new zone types are external unconditioned and neighbor conditioned. And we've also changed corridor zone type to now specifically be called glazed corridor zone type. So let's discuss these. The first zone type, external unconditioned, is a way for users to model a shape that will completely shade walls or ceilings or even floors that the room is adjacent to, such that there would be no external solar gains on the wall into the zone that is adjacent to this shade object. So this is a great way to quickly model zones that you would typically not include as a zone within a NatHERS assessment, such as a bike shed or a lightweight garden shed or an adjacent garage from a neighbouring lot, or even a plant room or a bike store for a multi-dwelling project. These are outdoor zones. They don't get modelled in the CHANAS simulation. They're completely excluded from simulation. And so you don't need to model any of the features on these zones, like their wall assemblies or insulations, floor or ceiling types. You don't add in any windows or doors on these zones, and in future versions will actually block you from doing this. The only attribute of value in these zones are its wall heights, just so that automatic wing walls are created correctly. So as an example, if we have a condition zone here, say this is our dwelling, and we have a little garden shed, say that you wouldn't normally include in your model typically, you'd previously perhaps model this as a screen in front of the wall with wing walls accounting for this shed and having to split the wall into multiple segments with an eave over this area, etc. However, now you could just model this garden shed as an external unconditioned zone, and Hero will now detect those wing walls. It will change the external wall that was adjacent to this zone to have a 0 external solar absorbance value for the simulation. So no solar gains are modelled through that wall, just conductive heating, conductive gains and losses. So this external zone type within the simulation is basically at outdoor air temperature. This zone type might also be useful when you want to model in a multi-dwelling project as a zone again that you wouldn't typically include, such as a plant room perhaps below a apartment, or a bike store that's heavily ventilated such that it's pretty much at outdoor air temperature. And the benefit again in this situation is you get to create what Hero calls model as it is projects. That room exists, and so it's actually easier in the workflow to quickly model it and just change its zone type, and all of the walls, wing walls, screens, eaves, etc. and adjacency conditions from any adjacent walls, floors and ceilings in your zones automatically update and are modelled for you. So external unconditioned zones shift into the common area dwelling, similarly to car parks and corridor zones, just to signify they're not part of the dwelling that they're attached to. They're not included in a NatHERS certificate or in any area calculations, etc. You can also select a new adjacency type that delivers similar results for walls and ceilings within the adjacency columns of the data grid. So you could select an adjacency type of a wall as external shaded. This functions pretty much the same as drawing an external unconditioned zone, but without the potential of creating automatic wing walls. The second new zone type we've added in version 1.1 is similar to external unconditioned. It's called neighbor conditioned. So again, this is very similar to the previous new zone type, but this new zone type is to deal with situations where you have a room or a space that for all NatHERS dwellings adjacent to it, be it adjacent on walls or floors or ceilings, they would have a neighbouring adjacency type. So this might be a conditioned commercial tenancy below or to the side of an apartment, or a conditioned common corridor for Class 2 projects, or a completely internal unconditioned common corridor, if it was unconditioned, or a lift or stairwell of a Class 2 project as per your NatHERS technical notes. And it's where you want to model that commercial tenancy or corridor as it is, to quickly pick up all of those adjacencies from any dwellings that touch it via floors or walls or ceilings. And again, any necessary shading objects created from that zone, such as automatic wing walls, are already created. And again, these neighbour conditioned zones are moved into the common area dwelling, so they're not included in any individual dwellings areas in simulation. Similarly to the external unconditioned zone type, you don't need to model any of its attributes, you don't need to change its wall constructions or insulations or add any windows, etc. In fact, we'll block that in future because they don't need to be modelled. The only thing you need, again, to model is wall heights, just so that your automatic wing wall heights are correct. So using this zone type is similar to just manually selecting a neighbouring adjacency from the data grid adjacency columns. As I mentioned, this new neighbour condition zone type would be used for conditioned Class 2 common corridors, even if they were glazed, or an unconditioned completely internal common corridor where it has no glazing, as per the NatHERS technical notes. This should be modelled as a neighbouring adjacency, so you would use this zone type. Obviously, you can continue to use your own methods for these situations of just selecting a neighbouring adjacency in the data grid, but as we expand on this model as it is feature of Hero, it will become much more useful for things like overall project areas, allowing better understanding of adjacency conditions, allowing you to suddenly change the project from, say, a conditioned corridor to unconditioned corridors and everything update automatically, and even in the future for allowing commercial JV3 or DTS assessments too. As I mentioned also, in version 1.0 beta we had a zone type called corridor. This is now changed to a glazed corridor unconditioned to expressly deal with this particular zone type in a NatHERS assessment. So because Hero doesn't know whether a common corridor that has external windows is to be conditioned or not, we need you to select glazed corridor unconditioned if it's not conditioned and it does have windows. If it is to be conditioned, you would use the neighbour condition zone type. I'll now discuss a range of other minor changes we've made in version 1.1. Firstly, this version is primarily being issued to address bug fixes and performance improvements. So we've hopefully knocked on the head most of the main bugs within the original version 1 beta. And so if you did encounter any of these issues in version 1, I think you'll be relieved that most of these have been addressed. We've improved the adjacency splitting ability of Hero so that it splits your floors and ceilings accurately without any oddities or freezing. And so you can drag and drop walls without worry and you'll be getting great results. That's been a big task for us. We're really proud of how well that's holding up given its high complexity. We've improved what we call null wall detection, these walls that face down, say, the middle spine of an internal wall, which can't be modelled in ChenNav. And so the majority of these cases are now detected accurately by Hero, and you'll see it disappear from being a real wall. And we've also amended that section of the program so you don't have little slivers of walls created as much too. We've improved automatic wing wall detection in version 1.1. Previously, the projection of these wing walls was based on the inside wall face coordinates. Now we've changed that so it now detects the wing wall projection based on outside face coordinates. You'll also see improvements in the way that we pick up screens as wing walls. So in version 1.1, a screen that's slightly in front of a wall can still be detected as an automatic wing wall if it's within certain bounds. And that just means you can utilize screens much more effectively as wing walls. I personally think this is the way we should be entering wing walls in Hero projects. We've still obviously got the ability to create those manually and individually on each wall, but using screens as to get picked up as automatic wing walls has a lot of benefits. You can move that screen, and any wall using that as a wing wall will have it update automatically. You can change the height of that screen, and the wing wall heights are updated automatically on all walls, rather than having to go into each wall and change its, say, left wing wall height or projection one at a time. Note, you don't need to connect those screens to walls for them to function as wing walls. That's only required for them to function as horizontal shading screens in front of a wall. Again, something we're hoping to automate in future too. We've added a new feature to door drawing mode where you'll notice that Hero now snaps to the typical common dimensions of 620, 670, 720, 770, 820 mm, etc. just so that you're usually right. Again, as for all snaps in Hero, if you zoom in further, you can avoid snaps. If you say need a custom door of 756 mm or something, just zoom in a bit further to avoid the snap. Within the wall construction library, you'll see a few changes. We've removed checkboxes from installation options as that was irrelevant. Within the assembly library, you'll see custom assemblies are now in italic font versus Hero default assemblies in standard font. We've added a few new constructions or assemblies to the assembly library, particularly AAC and some new timber constructions, with some more to come in version 1.2. We'll also be adding save load of wall lists in a future version too. Within the assembly table, we've changed the colouring scheme of the table to differentiate materials from air gaps from insulation materials better. The current insulation option is also shown in bold now, just so you're aware of what insulation option is currently being shown. And so as an example, if we change this from the default empty stud air gap as the insulation option to this glass wool insulation option, you can see the glass wool insulation is in bold where the air gap was previously. We've done quite a few performance improvements in regards to Hero's CPU usage, Hero's memory usage, and the time to save and load projects, so hopefully you'll notice that, particularly for large projects. We have significantly reduced the background import quality setting to cater to lower memory computers. Note, backgrounds are the leading memory user within Hero, and so if you do have a low memory computer of say 4 gigs or even 8 gigs, and you've got large A1 PDF backgrounds or lots of levels, you do want to make sure your background setting is set low enough. We'll be improving background image memory usage in future to allow low memory machines to still deal with large multi-level projects, but setting your background image quality lower will drastically help. Conversely, if you now notice for a project that your background now doesn't look as crisp and sharp as you would like, and you've got sufficient memory, you can always increase the background image quality within the settings, re-import that background, and it'll come in at the new quality setting. That's all I'll discuss today. If you'd like to read the full change list of version 1.1, you'll see that in the version 1.1 installer or at our website. Again, thank you for your continued support in Hero. We look forward to discussing this version and helping you out further over the next few weeks and months and moving ahead on version 1.2. We're hoping to target some big features in that release now that we've resolved a large deal of bugs and performance issues that took up the majority of time on this release, and so we're really excited about that next release too. Thanks very much.